to the point.
And good morning and welcome. I'm Roxanne Stein, in today for Kelly Dunn. This is the last week of campaigning before the August 24th primary. And coming up, we'll have the latest poll numbers, and they show which candidates are in the lead and which ones are falling behind. Been some changes. It'll be an interesting discussion. But first, I'll look at an issue that's getting an awful lot of attention in West Palm Beach that could have an effect on the upcoming race for mayor. Joining me this morning is West Palm Beach Mayor Lois Frankel, who is finishing up 2 terms. That's 8 years as mayor. She's looking for another consecutive term. But to do that, the city would have to change its charter. Welcome, Mayor Frankel. Nice to have you with us this morning.
Good morning.
Get right to the point. Why do you think the rules should be changed so you can have another term?
Well, let's put it this way. I think this is not about me. It's about voters having a choice and voters deciding whether or not they want to re-elect a public official. This is an issue that really has never directly been on the ballot for the voters of West Palm Beach, and I think they should have that opportunity.
So far, though, a petition drive to get enough names to change this and get the question on the November 2nd ballot, there's not enough signatures right now. It appears to be an indication the voters don't want to change the system. So what's wrong with the current system?
Well, I don't believe that's true. That drive's been 30 days. They have thousands of signatures. It usually takes 6 months to a year to get 10% of the signatures. So they're doing very, very well. And the committee has a right under the law to get 10% of the voters. That would be 5,800 signatures, and then bring it to the commission. And then the commission really gets to decide when to put it on a ballot. So I don't think you can say that they're failing. They just didn't get 5,800 signatures in 30 days, which is almost a near impossibility.
But you would like you're saying it's about the voters, but
yes.
You would like another term.
Well, here's what I've said. I said I'm not running for mayor right now. I am totally, completely focused on the job I'm doing. I said if the voters want to change the charter and they change the charter and the opportunity arises, I would run again. That's what I've said. But, hey, listen, I might like your job.
Stay as mayor for right now. Well, it appears, though, the only way then, but that it may not get on the November ballot.
Right.
That there would then have to be a special election. Is it worth the taxpayer money for that, Mayor Frankel?
Well, you know something, I don't think that's something that should be something I decide. Because this is, as I said, a bigger issue than myself. There's a committee. They're organized pursuant to state law. They're required to get 10% of the signatures of voters in order to get something on the ballot. Once they do that, they bring it up to the commission, and then the commission has to decide. They have to put it on either the general election, which would be on November, or a special election, and then the commission gets to decide when that would be. So that's not something for me to decide, and I don't think I should be the one to decide that.
But if there is a special election, though, back to the question, though, it would be taxpayer. A special election would involve taxpayer money.
Well, there could be a special election. They could call the special election at a municipal election. So I think that could be a vote-by-mail election. So I think that would really be up to the commission. You know, but there's a fundamental issue here, which I think goes to the voters, not to politicians, because I don't own the mayorship. No commissioner owns being a commissioner. These are positions that really belong to the public. And so the public should really, I believe, have the choice to decide whether or not they want to limit their own choice, because that's really what it's about. It's not about limiting a public office holder's ability to run. It's about limiting a voter's ability to have a full slate of people to choose from.
If this doesn't occur,
right,
will we see you running again in 4 years for mayor, or will you consider other options to represent the city, county, in other positions?
Well, you know, I've had a life of public service, but I do believe, though, that you can contribute to your community in so many different ways. So, you know, I don't have any long-range plans, really. I'm very focused on doing, I believe, I'm responsible to do the job I've been elected to do. And then, you know, I'm going to walk out of office with a smile, whether it's in 8 months or in 4 years or 5 years. I will leave this job with a smile. My object has been to leave this city in a better place than when I started. I believe I've been going in that direction, and there's so many wonderful ways to serve the public. That's where my heart is, and I'll do it either as a private citizen or as an elected official.
Thank you, Mayor Frankel, for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And coming up next, we've got a look at the newest poll numbers. Now for our roundtable discussion with News Channel 5 political analyst and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, Dr. Robert Watson, Brian Crowley, author of the Crowley Political Report, and our own John Shaman. Welcome all. First, there's been a big change in the Democrat race for U.S. Senate. Big change. A new Mason-Dixon poll of likely Democratic primary voters shows Kendrick Meek now with a substantial lead over Jeff Green. If the election were held today, 40% said they would vote for Meek, 26% for Green, but 28% said they are undecided. Surprised by the turn of events?
Yes, I'm very surprised, especially at the gap. I'm not surprised that Meek is ahead. I'm surprised that the gap is so large. It suggests that Jeff Green just hasn't done a very good job of telling people who he is before he went on the attack of Kendrick Meek.
Why the change? Yeah. Because 2 weeks ago when we talked, it was the other way around, that Green had a substantial lead over Meek.
Conventional political wisdom just 2-3 weeks ago was that Meek was dead in the water. It'll be too little too late. Early voting is starting, and he just was trailing by double digits. I think it's a product of two things. Number one, there's always a tightening, and I've said this before, there's always a tightening of the polls as we get closer to Election Day. But number two, in the case of Scott, Green, and a lot of these outsiders, they were ahead early on because people said, I'll take anybody but those in office. But I think the public is starting to pay attention now, and I don't think they like what they see in a lot of outsiders. They see potentially more ethical problems than with some of the insiders. They see less clarity on policy positions than with the insiders, and I think people aren't liking necessarily what they're seeing.
Well, and I was also wondering, John, is this perhaps part of the fact that Meek's, his campaign, he took it to TV. He also started his bus tour up in the northern part of the state, kind of a meet and greet. Do you think that's helped to turn things a little bit?
Maybe some people who haven't figured out who Kendrick Meek is are finally discovering who he is for the very first time. We talked about it on the show 2 weeks ago, that he had not been on television, and that when he finally got on television, all he did was attack his opponent, and we didn't learn anything about who Kendrick Meek is. Now he's doing this statewide bus tour, so those people who are politically connected are perhaps taking the time to go out and find out who he is.
Well, now this poll was taken Monday through Wednesday, and the debate between the two candidates occurred on Wednesday. Here's a part of it that's indicative of the tone of the debate that occurred Wednesday. It starts with Meek raising a question about Green making money when the housing market was going down.
Why didn't you go to your two United States senators in California and tell them? Why didn't you go on national television, as you went on national television, to gloat about how much money you made off the failure of homes in Florida, Arizona, and California? That's just a simple question, because I think Floridians want to know if their United States senator is going to bet against them or on them.
Okay, look. I saw the housing bubble coming, Kendrick, and I went up against the biggest banks on Wall Street, and I won. Look at Kendrick. I started with absolutely nothing. I worked my way through Johns Hopkins University and Harvard Business School. I was a busboy when I was in college. I was a waiter, and I worked hard every day in my life. And let me tell you something. I was not going to sit back and allow bad policies of guys like you in Congress who allowed these banks to run wild, destroy everything I had worked for and the jobs I'd created and the mouths I was feeding.
Based on the poll results, do you think Green is going to change his strategy?
You know, I was thinking that one or two of these candidates would try to rise above the fray and present themselves in a gentlemanly, polite air, because it has been so negative, and all I saw was ugly negativity. Even when both candidates were asked, okay, you have a question to throw to the other candidate, they both went after him after the same old thing. But we didn't see that. In a way, Meek has to go after Green, I think, on housing, because here in Florida, we're leading the country in these sort of housing struggles. A lot of people, this issue really resonates, that he made his money off of something that we're losing our money over. But I was just hoping to see one of them rise up, because now I think the risk is a lot of voters are going to be so turned off by the negativity that numbers might even be lower.
Is there a different strategy?
Well, I think that there's going to have to be for Jeff Green. I think he's also he's got a problem with the ick factor. You know, the yacht covered in vomit going to Cuba, the Lindsay Lohan, the Mike Tyson, the other people that have been involved in his life, that I think some voters may think that Jeff Green's a little too icky.
And the problem is, at this point, we are so close to the primary. Can you drastically change a strategy, especially if everything has been negative up to this point?
And if there's that ick factor, if that does play into it.
Well, he's got the money, though, if he wants to run a new commercial campaign. He's got the money to potentially change it, yeah.
Do that. But we want to get on to more of this poll. The Mason-Dixon poll has bad news for President Obama. We want to go to this now. Both Democrats and Republicans were asked to rate the president's performance. 44% said poor, 16% said excellent, 25% said good, 15% said fair. Overall, what does this mean for Democrats in Florida?
Well, again, it goes back to a couple of weeks ago. I think Brian had written about Alex Sink trying to distance herself from Joe Biden, saying that Joe Biden made some ridiculous comments down here and that, the current administration is poisonous for candidates here. Perhaps there is that disconnect. People don't see the administration being strong. They look at their own case. Am I better off than I was 2 years ago? If not, well, then I'm going to look maybe for somebody else, not the incumbent.
And could that hurt Democrats in general, that whole question of are you better than you were 2 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. The party in power normally has a tough time in off-election years. When the economy is as awful as it is today, that makes it even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that. The Democrats are keeping Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, under wraps. They have her probably secured in that unknown location where they kept Dick Cheney for all those years because she's radioactive. Now the president is. Although, interestingly, the president just got past financial reform, Wall Street regulation, and he didn't get a blip of even a point in the polls. Actually, this president has done a number of major historic bills, and it's not getting any bounce. So candidates are saying, thanks, Mr. President, no thanks. We don't want you to campaign for us.
Let's go to this poll results on the president's handling of the oil spill. And 41% said poor, 8% said excellent, only 8%, 28% said good, 20% said fair. Anybody surprised by those numbers?
I think the problem is we live in a video age, and for 100 days or so, all we saw was this oil spewing into the Gulf, and we seemed as a nation helpless. It almost took me back to Jimmy Carter dealing with the Iran hostage situation. Exactly. We saw those images of the blindfolded Americans,
and we counted
every single day, and that's what we started doing with the oil spill. And you could perhaps blame the media for that, but that's what it became. Every day, in every newscast, you saw a picture of that oil gushing into the Gulf.
I agree completely with John. I mean, 444 days of the Iranian hostage ordeal. Ted Koppel every night reminding us. Now, Carter ran a weak campaign and was not a good president, but that contributed to it. And we're seeing the same thing here now. No matter what Obama does, triple the workforce. Keep BP working at it. Secure a big deal so that BP can pay the individuals affected. No matter what he does, that cannot compete with that constant image of the spilled oil.
But we want to go from the president's poll results with the oil spill into the governor now. Let's take a look at how they rate Governor Christ's performance in handling the oil spill. Let's take a look at these numbers. 11% here said excellent, 32% said good, 30% said fair, 21% poor. Now, when the spill first occurred, it has seemed that the governor got fairly good response, fairly positive feedback on this. Is this more a reflection of what people think of everybody inside and everybody in the top offices right now and how they feel about, perhaps, again, just that nothing happened for so long?
All right.
I think this is a temporary thing, both for President Obama and for Governor Christ when it comes to Florida voters. The fact of the matter is that most of Florida was not impacted by the oil spill. They're reacting more to, as John pointed out, the kind of coverage it took on largely in the Gulf Coast states. So I think people have sort of this dissatisfaction that it didn't go well. But I think for President Obama and Charlie Crist in Florida, it's very temporary.
Yeah. I've agreed with almost everything Brian has written and said over several years, but I have to disagree with him on this. I think this issue is one of those issues. Not all issues are created equal. For example, George W. Bush's Hurricane Katrina handling. That was not like any other issue. That issue just resonated with people. People are fed up with the oil spill, and the impression that government is inept has been neutered from acting. And Crist initially got a little bit of a bump. Crist was out there on the beach inspecting it. He seemed to be everywhere.
But then without result, the disdain set in.
Yeah, it is. I hear all the time people just saying, wow, this issue has taken on a life of its own. It's symptomatic of government's inability to deal with problems on a day-to-day basis.
We're going to have to leave it there for right now. We've got a lot more to get to, including when we come back, we're going to talk about the McCollum-Scott race. It's taken an interesting turn. We'll discuss that with the panel in just a moment. We're back with our panel to the point on the issues of the week, and a new poll is showing Attorney General Bill McCollum may be turning the tide in the Republican race for governor against Rick Scott. The Mason-Dixon survey of likely Republican primary voters shows McCollum now leads Scott 34 to 30%. And just a week ago, though, Scott was leading by 6 percentage points. A key factor, though, to look at is that 33% of those questioned are still undecided. To our panel. John, we'll start with you.
What does this mean?
Undecided. Yeah. What does this mean? Although, I guess there's a lot to discuss here because there's been such a switch again.
2 weeks ago, it looked like Bill McCollum was dead in the water. We saw a poll that had a 16-point spread for Rick Scott. What is this telling us? Can we trust any of these polls anymore? I think it just shows the only predictable thing is just how unpredictable this whole election season is and who will take charge.
Right. Brian, what do you do if you're McCollum or you are Rick Scott and you want to get that undecided vote?
Well, I think McCollum has succeeded in the last week or so of creating this atmosphere of distrust and fear about Rick Scott. I think Rick Scott has made a number of mistakes in the last couple of weeks. His failure to do the statewide debate can lend a tone of arrogance. He has done very little mingling with average voters. He very rarely meets with reporters. And it's a dangerous thing to do for somebody who's brand new to Florida's political scene. People don't really know who Rick Scott is. And now this question of trust has come up, and I think McCollum has done a very good job of selling that, and I think Rick Scott's got his work cut out for him.
Robert, are we seeing a sea change among prospective voters, both Democrats and Republican, with Green and Scott, that perhaps now the outsiders are indeed out and the insiders are back in?
Well, I think it's safe to say that for weeks and weeks and weeks, no one was really taking a look at Scott or Green. They liked them because they simply weren't McCollum, Meek, or any of the incumbents. Now they're taking a little closer look, and I think both my guests here, colleagues here, are absolutely right. But I think it's two other quick points. One is, was it Mark Twain that said there's lies, damn lies, in statistics? You could say the same thing about polls. I think if no matter who I'm working with, if I'm working for McCollum, I'm working for Scott or Green or Meek, I tell them at this point, we need to go full engines. We need to go full ahead, because even if we're up by 10, 12 points, that's today. The next poll's able to show. I don't think any of the candidates can be comfortable in terms of what the polls are saying at this point. This is extraordinary. In 2 weeks, we've seen 5 or 6 major variations in the polls.
We talked earlier about, just for a moment, Brian mentioned the debate that wasn't. Well, earlier we showed you a little bit of that debate between Kendrick Meek and Jeff Green that was shown across the state. The debate organizers did have another debate planned. This one was supposed to be between Bill McCollum and Rick Scott. But as Brian mentioned, Scott declined to participate. So they went forward anyway with journalists asking McCollum questions. Here's a part where they asked McCollum why Scott was in the lead.
Why do you think he gained traction at all?
He gained traction because of his money. He spent over $45 million of his own money, some of which, of course, took from the ill-gotten gains back at Columbia HCA when he was ripping off senior citizens and Medicare and taxpayers.
Okay.
That's how he got advantage.
All right, hold on. I have to take a break, guys.
All right, before we take a break, let's talk very quickly about what we started to talk about. Do you think Scott not showing up for this? First of all, why wouldn't you show up for a debate?
Colossal mistake. You never give your opponent that kind of free airtime. You need to project confidence. You need to get in there. Plus, if the polls are accurate, he's dropping, and he's trending in this direction. He needs to turn that back around. Colossal mistake, in my opinion.
I spoke to some people on Scott's team, and, they were, in their own internal polling a week and a half ago, they were 19, 20 points ahead. They thought they could sit on the ball. They saw no benefit of going to the debate. I think they were overprotective of a candidate who, I don't know if they said this to the candidate's face, but who they thought was an amateur in going into these debates and might not do as well against McCollum.
The problem is you give your opponent an hour, a free hour, to just take shots at you with no chance for rebuttal except for perhaps the journalists there, and that could be costly.
I think McCollum won the last debate, too, and I think we were all in agreement when we talked about that. Scott had that great line at the end when McCollum made a mistake about raising user fees, but overall I thought McCollum won it, which should be yet another reason that Scott should say, I need to get in there and redeem myself.
Well, and that's it. You've got that time to prepare if you didn't think you did win that one.
Sure.
Want to go to another poll. The new Arizona poll, the new Arizona law, to stop illegal immigrants has become a big issue in this race. Let's take a look at latest poll numbers on this one. When both Democrats and Republicans were asked if they support or oppose a similar law in Florida, 55% said they would support it, 39% said they would oppose it. Anybody surprised by that number? Very quickly.
No, not really. It's become a toxic debate. I think if the next poll question was, could you name 3 things that are in the Arizona law, nobody could probably do it. But
But it's a lot more complicated issue in this state than it is in Arizona. We have one policy for Haitians who come here, another policy for Cubans who come here, and another policy for everybody else. There's no one-size-fits-all in this state for immigration.
All right, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there for right now. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send us a comment about today's show, go to WPTV.com and click on the political link. For all of our guests, enjoy the rest of your day.